Hi, I'm Jaki Irvine. This is Acro. It's part of Sh-O or Sh-Ow, whichever way you'd like to say it or read it. And it consists of 13 screens, 13 channels of video. All of them have a soundtrack. 3 of those channels are of musicians, all playing together in sync. And the other 10 channels are of different small fragments that were shot in Mexico City and in Ireland. And all of those soundtracks are wild. All together, they come together to create an ambience, a way of kind of finding oneself and losing oneself, if you like, through sound, the way we do in our lives. The way a song can kind of haunt you for a little bit and you hold on to it for a while and remember it and misremember it. And you float and you get stuck. And then somehow or other it still holds you up. Or you forget you're adrift. It loops and allows you to loop too for a little while, and then you drift on again. Cracklin' Rosie was one of the greatest hits of Neil Diamond in the 70s. And I was never such a great fan, I have to admit. But at a certain point, this particular CD was being played all the time in my mother's house. And I began to think this CD, this album felt like actually like a symptom. It was being played so much. In an effort to avoid, and I went to the other end of Ireland to an exhibition opening there, wondering what other artists really had to say or think about. What it was dawning on me was dementia. I looked at the other artists' work and was thinking about how they were thinking about it, and it was a much more scientific approach. And then I went to an Indian restaurant, again trying to escape. And as I sat down with the first poppadom, on came the collected works of Neil Diamond's greatest hits yet again. And I knew every lyric and every song that was going to come up next. And I realized there was no escaping Neil Diamond, and there was no escaping Cracklin' Rosie. Neil Diamond told a story about how he went to a small mining community. And at the end of the night, as some people hooked up with one another, and those men that didn't would head off and buy themselves a big bottle of cheap rosé wine. And they used to call that wine Cracklin' Rosie. I always thought Rosie was an actual woman, especially when he was saying, you know, Cracklin' Rose, you're a store-bought woman. But in actual fact, it was the substitute for a woman. There was no woman called Rosie. I thought that was fascinating as well, the notion of identity being based on something that doesn't really exist as such, but that you need anyway, and how fragile that all is. And that's really when I became fascinated with Cracklin' Rosie and how it wouldn't leave you alone. So I invited some musicians I knew to come together. They didn't know one another, and I asked them not to introduce themselves to one another through conversation, but to introduce and speak to one another through the words of the song. The only way you can communicate is through the words of this song. The limitations of it, the desire to speak but being frustrated as you lose other possibilities outside. You'll see there's a lot of neon on the walls, and all of the neon words have been made by taking Cracklin' Rosie, just that little set of letters, and playing with them and forming them and shaping them and reshaping them and pulling them apart and putting them back together again. And ironically, some of them reference the kind of symptoms that can arise with dementia: the denial, the horror, the sadness, and then the playfulness and funniness. And of course, you know, when I speak of dementia in this term, I'm speaking of something that not just one person goes through, but everyone around the person who's going through it goes through it. It's something that permeates everywhere. And this is really the basis for this show.
Cracklin' rose, cracklin' rosie, cracklin', cracklin' rosie.
music very often is time repeated. That's what a rhythm is. A one little bit of noise repeated turns into a rhythm, turns into something musical, and then slides away again. Sounds musical to one and noise to another, but essentially that's how music builds up, through small loops. And this is all a whole load of loops that is both noise and something more, remembering and letting go. This was one of the things I asked the musicians to do, to hold on and let go. We spent 2 days in a studio, in fact, and they were separated out across the different booths. Now I've folded them back in on top of one another. But at that point, we were kind of separated out. So they were almost sending signals to one another through their instruments, which of course is what improvisation is anyway. It's this listening to one another and responding through listening, or not responding, and something building up in that way. And there are many ways through. There's not just one way through this work. There are many ways to come to it and many ways to spend time with it. In the work, there's a couple of buildings that are sheathed. On the scaffolding, there are meshes. When the wind blows, it's almost as if they're breathing. It gives a different life to things. And also, there are banners already on the building, and I thought, it would be nice to contribute to that. A new banner, and trying to take care of the window, and yet also think about the fragility of the window. It made sense to work with this image that's shattered glass, a giant shattered glass on landscape. Of course, thinking about the window and the landscape outside. What it means is that we're able to dim down the space and yet still see people rambling around outside with their dogs and enjoying life. And it creates a kind of mesh, almost as if people are already memories somehow, but they're part of the work too. Somehow or other, it's almost like we all become memories before we're even gone, somehow or other, for a brief moment in time. And then on we go. Alongside this installation, I'll also be presenting a new live work with the musicians from this work, which is wonderful. They're going to come over with me and work with a couple of musicians from here. And we're developing a new work that will be performed on May 24th. And it's an experiment. It's an experiment on playing with and improvising around Show Me the Way to Go Home. It was made particularly famous that, it's an old sea shanty, but really it had a bit of a second wind, as it were, when it was sung in Jaws. Always, it seems, it's sung at a moment, whether it's in a film or in a book, because it's appeared, it was around since the 1920s. It's always appeared at a moment when people are in a kind of state of crisis. Yeah, and I'm excited to see how it's going to work out. And I'll be VJing with some material I've shot, some film material, some recorded sounds, and also some new CGI work I've been experimenting with. So that will kind of all come together as a kind of graphic score to interact with the musicians and improvise with that. So yeah, I think it should be fun.